Happy Wednesday, writers, or whatever day it happens to be where you are. Today's topic is going to be how many drafts is the right amount. Um, and before we get into that, look at all these lovely books I have here to throw. I haven't been doing that for a while, so I figured I need to pick it back up again, or more like drop it again. Essentials of English, Research Guide for Writers, Writing Prompts, Writer's Creative Workbook, and English words from Latin and Greek elements. Alright, that one was a little loud, sorry. All of those are usually stacked nice and neat off to the side here because they are good resources for writers. Don't worry, they're all fine. They're old books, so they're a little beaten up anyway. Totally functional, though. Don't mind the noise in the background. One of my dogs is clickety-clacking around right now. Anyways, the topic. How many drafts is right? The answer to that question is going to vary wildly, on a number of different factors. The reason I wanted to talk about this is I've been seeing this question come up a lot in the writers groups that I'm a part of, and it always bugs me a little bit when I see people come back and say, oh, you should always do it 3 times, you should always do it 5 times, 10 times. There is no magic number. There is no number that is right across the board for all writers. It's going to depend on some varying factors, and it's not going to be the same answer for you every time. So what are the core factors on what determines how many times you need to edit your work? I'd say the biggest one is your experience as a writer. How many years have you actually been practicing? How many books have you finished so far, or short stories if that's what you're working on, poetry, whatever the type of writing is. How much experience do you have with that type of writing? How many years have you been writing in total? Have you gotten any kind of education or training to assist with your writing? Do you get help from any kind of workshop group or other writers that support you? So the amount of experience you have is going to be pretty critical in terms of how many times you need to draft. And I'm sure you probably know that the less experience you have, the more you're going to need to draft. That goes without saying. Another big factor is, what is your familiarity with the subject matter that you're writing? Is this the first time that you're writing horror? Probably going to need to draft more. Have you written a dozen fantasies before and this is number 13? Probably not as much, right? You're very well adapted to that genre. You have a good idea of what you're doing and what you're looking for and what your audience is looking for, so probably not as much. So for the person who is doing their first horror novel, they may need to draft 5, 6, 7 times, whereas the fantasy author who has gotten quite good at it, maybe they only need to do it like 3 times. Again, no magic numbers. I'm just pulling these out of my head. Another factor that can contribute is the feedback you receive. I know a lot of writers like to get beta readers involved after they write either their first, second, or third draft. I think this is a good idea. I think it is important for us as writers to welcome feedback and constructive criticism and be able to take that under consideration. And note that I said constructive criticism, not destructive criticism. There is a difference. So depending on the feedback that you're getting from beta readers, or if you're working with an editor or another writer who is serving as an editor for you, what is their feedback? And if the feedback is trending negative as a whole, you may need to look at your story as a whole. You may need to do a lot of reworking. Now, granted, not all the feedback that you get from your beta readers or your editors necessarily is the right thing for you and your story. There are going to be instances where you're like, thanks for the feedback, but I don't agree, or that doesn't work for what I'm going for. But it is important to look at that feedback as a whole and see if there are any trends. And trends is really where you need to pay attention. I'll just give an example for mine. When I was having people beta read my novel, several people talked about the confusion over a character's name because it was too similar to another character's name. And so I was like, yeah, I'm just going to change it. That's a little thing, but it can be really little things like that that you don't pick up on, but then a bunch of people read it and they're like, that's confusing, that doesn't make sense, that isn't worded well, this plot twist doesn't seem to fit, or this character is acting unlike themselves in this scene. Could be a number of things. So that should be taken into consideration too in the drafting process. And finally, and I think this one is probably the most important, is, well, what feels right to you? You're the author. This is your work. This is your story, your world, your characters, your relationships. This is your brainchild. So if you've done 3 drafts already and you think, yeah, this is pretty solid, I like where this went, I like the character development, I like the plot, I like the setting, I feel like I've closed all my loopholes, the feedback has been positive, then sounds like you're done, right? But if you've gotten 3 drafts deep and you're like, it's just, this is still not working, there's still something missing here, that spark isn't there, or I don't feel like I've developed this character enough, or this plot twist didn't end up the way I wanted it to, I feel like I've left loose ends, well, that's a sign that you need to keep looking and you need to keep working it. Now, I'm going to caution a little bit about this because a lot of us writers do tend to be perfectionists, and we need to keep in the back of our mind at all times that it will not be perfect. We need to accept that and be okay with that. None of our work will ever be perfect. None of the work that we read will ever be perfect. So we should strive for excellence, but understand that perfection will not be reached. And if we go into writing a story thinking this is going to be 100%, there's not going to be anything wrong with it whatsoever, you're going to be drafting it for the rest of your life. You will not release it. So we do need to kind of walk that tightrope between this doesn't feel quite right, I need to keep working this, and this isn't perfect. It's a very fine line to walk, for sure, between the two, but it's important. So I hope that you find this information helpful. Again, this is something I've seen on the writers groups a lot, so keep an eye out for the question and see what other writers are saying about it, because I'm sure there's some other useful information out there. But just keep in mind that if they're giving you an actual number, take it with a grain of salt. Let's put it that way. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I always forget to say that, but I'm going to start saying it now as often as I remember, so do that too. If you like it, click the like button. Kind of already said that. If you don't like it, feel free to click the dislike button, and I will see you next time.